I deem it a great privilege to be asked to interview our distinguished guest, Dr. Geoffrey Dobbs on my left, and his wife Elisabeth further over. I propose to try and ask a number of questions which I hope will cover a very wide area, but I think we might start by just observing that the League of Rights as a movement grew out, of course, of the old social credit movement, which had its roots deep back before the First and Second World War, and even the roots of that social credit idea goes much deeper than that. And the man, of course, who provided what we call social credit, a revelation to the late C.H. Douglas, and Dr. Geoffrey Dobbs here, and his wife Elisabeth, had the good fortune, I would say, to have known them personally, known Douglas and his wife, and to have worked with them. So we are very privileged tonight to go back into history and go back to the roots of the movement that those of you in this audience tonight are particularly concerned about. Now, I thought, Dr. Dobbs, we might start by something a little personal, your own background. When people first of all hear doctor, they wonder whether you're a medical doctor or so many doctors today. Or perhaps you're a doctor of economics, I hope not.
Well, no, they've called me a lot of things, actually. For instance, in a very broad sense, a botanist, but my special line was on soil microbes, fungi particularly. And at Bangor, University College Bangor, where I've been since 1947, except I've retired a good time ago, I was called the forest botanist. So I was dealing with foresters, mainly forest ecology and forest soils. Those were my main teaching and research interests.
And the doctorate, though, that's in what field?
Well, in botany in the broad sense, and in fungi in the specialist sense.
All right, well, how did you first become interested in social credit, hear about it?
Well, curiously enough, I sort of spiraled in from the Boy Scout movement. I was running a scout troop, and there was a chap walking about in a green uniform who knew all about bows and arrows. So I got him along to talk to my boys, and after the meeting, he started talking what sounded to me a lot of nonsense. And we walked round the block about 6 times, and I still thought it was a lot of nonsense, but it got under my skin. And gradually, as I say, spiraled in until I heard about this man called Major Douglas. And there I found the headquarters of the social credit movement, as it was in those days, right in the middle of London, quite near my college. A well-organised concern with a number of young ladies serving lunch. Very good lunch it was. There's one of them over there. And of course, once I was in touch with the foundation of the thing, one became a social creditor. But I'd still say it took 10 years before I was a mature enough social creditor to initiate things on my own. It takes time.
You mentioned how you met your wife Elisabeth. She was herself closely associated with the movement. your late father.
Yes, I'm one of the earliest second-generation social creditors. So
Yes,
I caught it from my
I recall his name, Edwards. He used to.
Yes, he was Hewlett Edwards, and he used to correspond with people in these parts. And he was overseas director of the Social Credit Secretariat.
What would you say is the central aspect of social credit? What do you feel that Douglas brought to the world that was quite unique, quite distinctive, quite original?
I think what he brought was realism. That is to say, political and economic argument and discussion was all carried on in words, and mainly by people with art and linguistic background. And into this general talk and discussion came a man with a practical background, an engineer. He happened also to have a tremendous broad mental capacity and a deep philosophy, fundamentally Christian philosophy. And I think if one can sum up his great contribution, it was that he brought all this waffle, this talk, down to practical reality. Of course, he soon identified, put his finger on the cause of the major trouble, which all the wafflers of left and right and so on had ignored, namely, of course, the monetary system. And after a while, he found that it wasn't merely a question of correcting the system, it was the people who ran the system. As a simple engineer, he thought, well, I've discovered a serious defect in the system. But he soon discovered that the defect suited the people who were running it very well. And that normally, as most practical people would say, if you find an error in something, naturally people would put it right. He soon came across people like, for instance, Sidney Webb.
The top Fabian.
Yes, who said, well, Mr. Douglas, there's a good deal of argument about your system, but we don't like its purpose. And that was honest speaking. His purpose was decentralization of power to the individual, economic and political power. And their purpose was centralization. And they had the honesty at least to say, we don't like its purpose, and that's really the reason why, for instance, economists don't like social creditors, because one is top down and the other's bottom up, as you might say.
Would you say then it's primarily a philosophical question?
Well, no, I think it's a practical question, yes. It's philosophical also. I don't think you can distinguish them. Because one of the things he did was to make it clear to us that every philosophy that, say, idea about the nature of things people have expresses itself in a policy that is a series of practical objectives. And such a philosophy tied down to a policy is rightly called a religion. Well, it means to bind back. So I think that is really the great contribution that Douglas made.
Well, then you would say that large numbers of people would never accept the financial side of social credit because they object to the purpose of